Let's tackle another big one, shall we? This is a rather impressive dreadnought from what is probably, to be honest, my favorite era of Martin guitars. This is a D-18 from 1958, and it's got some vibe. It's a bluegrass guitar, and it looks the part. One thing about Martins from this era that always strikes me when I pick them up is just how unexpectedly lightweight they are. I don't know if this is a consequence of the dimensions that they milled the components, or some intrinsic physical attribute of the woods used, or if they somehow just get lighter due to age or a combination of all these things. But they do feel like eggshell light in comparison to newer ones. And this one needs work. The action is, well, we'll say it's just bearable. It's a little over 8/64ths at the 12th fret on the bass side, 6/64ths on the treble. The thing is, to achieve that action, someone has come along and planed down the bridge a lot. Specifically on the front side, it angles from back to front, and at the front it's only 7/32 of an inch, which is about 5.5 millimeters. Much too low. In addition, the bridge seems to have come off before at some point, and it's been re-glued. But there is a tremendous deformity in the soundboard right behind it. Now, this is not the typical bellying we talk about as a common feature in Martins, which is a more general pull-up of a large part of the soundboard, all back here. But this is more localized. And the thing is, it's like 3 or 4 millimeters and raised in this area. If we fix that and replace the low bridge, then of course the action is going to be very much worse than it is already. So it's definitely time for a neck reset. When we see something like this, it's often time to look inside and inspect the bridge plate, because this is not normal.
Looking at the inside, there don't seem to be huge problems from previous work. The braces are tight to the top and aren't split or broken. The bridge pad, however, does have some string wear, but more importantly, there's a split running between the pinholes and beyond. That kind of spells doom. It needs to come out and the new one has to go in. It's sometimes possible to press out a bulge without removing the pad, but in this case it just makes sense to replace it.
Now, I suspect the bridge was loose for a long time, because we can see just how cupped the top surface of the wing here is. It's all fastened pretty securely now, but I can tell by the thickness back here that a whole lot of material had to come off the bottom of this bridge to get it to sit down. It was probably bent up through the string tension for quite some time, and that may have contributed to the deforming as well, in conjunction with the weak bridge plate, because the crack running through it, there's no resistance to the back half of these folding forces. So, time for a new bridge. I have a bridge blank on order from a colleague out west. This rosewood here, Brazilian rosewood, folks, it's not commercially available anymore. It's very difficult to source through legal, ethical channels as a new product. And to import it, you'd be dealing with some heavy international law. Like if you're in the US and you were to use this stuff without the right paperwork, it's tantamount to a federal crime. And in order to get it into the country, you would need a good lawyer to navigate the process as a raw material. It's different when it's in an instrument, but even then, the rules have changed a lot. It's gone back and forth quite a bit in the last 15 years. I don't use it in new builds. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's a great material, but I don't ascribe the magical properties to it that some people do. However, sometimes as a repair guy, I have to contend with the weight of expectations around preserving what has become a very valuable cultural icon. And if I use the wrong material to replace this and make a perfectly lovely, exacting in every way, and very functional bridge, something that would be just fine if this guitar was 11 years younger. If it was made in 1969 and I used Indian rosewood, no one's going to care. But because this is 1958, it would be like peeling a whole series of $100 bills off the value of this thing. Probably more than what this repair is going to cost. So I know the source of the blank I'm going to be getting, and I know that it's very old and predates the import ban. But if you bring me a guitar from 1985 and ask for me to use Brazilian rosewood to make a bridge for it, I'm going to say no. It doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. This stuff, it costs a mint, too, for what it is. But in this case, I think it's probably the responsible thing to do.
Yet another instance where the end wraps are rising over the saddle.
Okay, we can see where the straight edge ends up in relation to the front edge of the bridge there. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch above the soundboard, if that. So we ideally want that to come to just a hair above the top surface of a bridge, which is actually quite a bit taller than the one that's on the guitar right now. So there's going to be quite a bit of material to remove from the heel. I think I'm going to start off by removing the bridge first, and then probably take the neck off, and then remove the bridge pad. At this point it doesn't make much difference, but this seems to be the first step.
I can definitely feel that this is not the first time the bridge has come off. It was installed with a different kind of glue other than hide glue. Feels more like tight bond. With enough time and persuasion, though, it comes off just the same. The last time it was glued back on, there was some pretty serious damage under here. Big chunks of spruce missing. Lots of soundboard that's gone. And you can see this black line at the back end of the bridge. That's a score line that someone made when they were trying to put it back on again. It's pretty deep. That's done with an X-Acto knife or something, which again can seriously weaken the soundboard depending on how deep it goes. It basically creates a hinge. I'll heat up the fingerboard extension and separate that. That definitely feels like hide glue. And I'll remove the 15th fret. I'll drill for the electric heaters. Hit the pocket there. You can see how easily the drill bit goes in. And I'll subject it to 10 or 12 minutes of heat from these. These are foam cutters from Hot Wire Foam Factory. Came off very clean this time.
There's an awful lot of glue in this one. And something I don't normally see, there's a strip of masking tape across the top edge here. I'm not sure why. I'll try and scrape out some of this glue while it's still gelatinous, especially down here at the bottom. And then when it heats up, it all just flows down there.
We'll switch gears and move on to our good old friend, the 6119, which has had several coats of lacquer, both front and back. I'll do a preliminary rough leveling here before adding more coats, using some 600 grit sandpaper on a block. I'm noticing that there's some serious telegraphing going on from the previous tuner holes that have been filled with epoxy. This happened right through the veneer. Of course, the problem is more evident on the face. Lots of sinkage. I'll sand back through most of it. The stubborn areas, I'm going to use little Glue Boost fill and finish. Not a sponsor. This is a cyanoacrylate that lacquer actually doesn't mind sticking to. A lot of super glues act almost like a resist when you spray lacquer on them. This stuff does not have that problem. When that's had a chance to harden, I'll scrape it back using a razor, which I put a little bit of plastic tape on the edges to act as a depth stop. Scrapety scrape, and then I'll sand some more, then I can go on adding more lacquer on top. To help remove the bridge pad, I'll moisten a paper towel and let that sit for about 20 minutes. That'll soften the glue at the edges and make it easier to get a blade in. Here are some of the tools I use. They let me pull towards myself from the back edge of the pad. Before we get into that, there's an issue to address, and that is, if this guitar was 10 years older, we'd face a situation where the bridge pad was tucked into pockets, cut into the sides of the X-brace arms. In 1948, Martin stopped that practice and just started butting the pad up against the sides of the braces. Current practice seems to be to just slice the older style through the pad with a short flush-cutting saw and then butt them as normal, because it's very difficult to get a new plate in there cleanly. I'll put my little heating pad in there with a clamp. I control it with this inexpensive rheostat that's sold on Amazon as a router speed control. The pad itself is a snowmobile engine block heater. Then it's on to several bouts of careful prying and separation, followed by more heating. The area under this bridge is so thin and so flexible, and in some areas it's actually paper thin. It took me a couple of hours to do this. Just a whole lot of gentle back and forth and not pushing anything too hard. But I got it out in one piece. You can see the split. The back half just folds up under string tension.
Here's a comparison with a modern 2000 era Martin bridge. They're very similar, except that the modern one is about 2.5 millimeters wider in the belly area. They added just a little bit more width at some point. Okay, time to ponder. I don't know if I can accurately describe just how thin and flexible it feels back here in this area where the hump was. There's no evidence of sanding on the inside, and the exterior here has got rub marks and stuff from previous bridge removals and things, but it doesn't look like it's been refinished. It's so thin. It doesn't feel like a steel string guitar. Unfortunately, I don't own a Hacklinger gauge, which is something that you can use to measure thicknesses like this. But it has the pliability of a classical guitar top, but a thin model, like a Manuel Rodriguez or something, or a flamenco guitar. I'm going to bet it's less than 2 millimeters. Add to that the fact that this score line that was made at the back edge of the bridge here lines up almost perfectly with the edge of the bridge pad. I think I'm in a situation where I have to do the totally taboo thing and actually make a slightly larger bridge pad, because I want something underneath that score line, and frankly we need better support back here. Like, I'm sure I can press it flat for the glue up, but I imagine it's probably going to come back up. And, worst case scenario, maybe actually add like a supplemental cleat or something back here in this area. Because you'd ask, how could that happen, with Martin and its vaunted quality? I heard T.J. Thompson talking with Dick Boak, Martin historian, about how these things were sanded at the factory using the stroke sander, which I mentioned in a previous video, where if you have a bridge pad on here and someone's a little heavy-handed with the sanding, the bridge pad actually holds things up a little bit and causes kind of a, it's a stiffer area. So if you're not careful, you can press too hard behind it and you will actually, with a 100 grit belt, sand a lot of spruce away. But this is more flexible than I would feel comfortable making a guitar. And when we add a new taller bridge with more torque on the top, that could cause even worse issues. Like, I think it would probably hump right back up. And so yeah, we're going to go with we're talking 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch wider bridge pad to come back in this area just a little bit more. Of course, later on in the 70s, Martin itself made gigantic rosewood bridge pads that were like 1/8 of an inch thick and quite substantially wider, which are universally detested. But we're going to be restrained just a bit more.
One nice thing about Brazilian rosewood is when you're planing it, it smells wonderful. It doesn't smell exactly like roses, but it's definitely one of the most beguiling, sensuous fragrances a piece of wood can emit. It perfumes the mind and the hands. I'm going to make this bridge a moderate height, midway in the Martin spectrum, about 5/16 of an inch tall or 7.9 millimeters. They go from 9/32 all the way up to 3/8 of an inch. I want to be kind of conservative here. Eastern maple doesn't have much of a smell at all, really, until you wet it or burn it. It's okay. The original bridge pad was just over 90 thousandths of an inch tall. I'm going to make mine about 100 thousandths. A little increase in thickness actually adds up to a lot more stiffness. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. So I do want to make the area stiffer. Rather than position the bridge pad perfectly in line with the grain, I'll skew it slightly so no one grain line runs completely through all the pinholes. This was wishful thinking, really, because they do manage to crack through no matter how you align it, but it feels good. I'll plane the sides of the bridge pad so that the angle will fit perfectly within the X-brace. I made a caul, C-A-U-L, and I'll tape that to the pad. I'm going for hump reduction, so I'll be essentially pressing the top flat with a larger exterior caul as well during the glue up. This kind of mirrors what happened at the Martin factory. They slightly arched the braces, but the tops and the braces together, they were glued up and pressed flat during that operation, with the expectation that they'd spring back into a bit of a curve, and actually assume more of a curve when the string tension went on. Yes, I'm aware of the Thompson belly reducer, which is a set of pre-radiused cauls, often used with heat to reverse the curve. I borrowed one once and it worked fine, but I didn't see much of a difference, and in this case, where I'm replacing the bridge pad, I think this will be fine. So this is as far as we'll take it this week. Next week we'll put the neck back on, we'll make the bridge, and we'll see how this thing sounds. Right now I'm very happy with the direction this is going. Alright, we'll see you next week. Take care.